If you walk down a major American street in the 1980s, the environment carried a distinct, persistent level of physical risk. This comparative bar chart maps out exactly how severe that gap was. According to Department of Justice data from the era, violent crimes like robbery and homicide were 4 to 9 times higher in the US compared to Europe, while property crimes were roughly double. Comparing these figures internationally was notoriously difficult. Countries clashed over how to properly define specific offenses, and local police departments relied on wildly inconsistent reporting standards. Still, the sheer volume of these reports firmly planted an idea in the global consciousness. The United States is inherently more dangerous and crime-prone than its international peers. Fast forward to 2024, and the data tells a remarkably different story. The national property crime rate recently dropped to its lowest level in at least 48 years. Looking at this trend line of FBI statistics, you can trace the property crime rate dropping steadily from the late 1990s to its 2024 trough, eventually halving to just 1,760 offenses per 100,000 people. Notice this massive shaded section covering the bottom of the graph. That represents larceny, defined simply as theft without the use of force or fraud, which makes up over 72% of all property crimes in the US. These numbers are plummeting despite a major blind spot in the data. Currently, less than 1 in 3 property crimes are ever actually reported to the police. To understand why thousands of these invisible thefts are vanishing from the statistics, we have to zoom out of national databases and look closely at the micropsychology of a single thief. For that, we turn to the Stockholm subway system between 2006 and 2008. During this period, the local transit authority rolled out a massive network of surveillance cameras. But they didn't turn them on all at once. They installed them station by station over 2 years. This staggered timeline created what economists call a natural experiment. Because the exposure to surveillance was randomized by the installation schedule, researchers could isolate the exact impact of the cameras, independent of outside factors, like police presence or the local economy. The results were immediate. When cameras went up in the city center stations, overall crime dropped by 25%. Simply placing a camera in the environment forced the total crime rate down. But it did not affect every type of criminal equally. Researchers divided the subway data into 2 distinct behavioral categories: planned crimes and heat-of-the-moment crimes. This bar chart breaks down the drop in planned offenses. Under surveillance, pickpocketing dropped by 20%, and robberies plummeted by 60%. Now watch the second column for impulsive crimes. Even with cameras, offenses like assaults and drug possession remained completely flat. This split highlights a core principle of behavioral economics. Thieves act as rational actors, constantly performing a rapid, subconscious cost-benefit analysis before they strike. Deterrence fails for impulsive crimes because an intoxicated or highly emotional offender is entirely incapable of calculating the increased risk of a camera. Society hasn't cured the human impulse to break the law. We have merely engineered a way to manipulate the economic risk for rational offenders. There is one major caveat to the Stockholm data, known as the displacement effect, when a preventative measure doesn't stop a crime, but simply pushes it to a new location. While the cameras deterred 575 crimes inside the stations, 15% of those deterred pickpockets relocated to unmonitored zones right outside the station doors. Yet, even factoring in that displacement, the cameras resulted in an absolute decrease of 500 crimes across the transit network. This equation lays out the final financial breakdown. The transit authority spent roughly $5 million to install and run the system. Divided by the net 500 prevented crimes, they essentially paid $2,000 to stop a single offense. Public safety, at least in a controlled environment, operates as a purchasable commodity with a highly predictable return on investment. The localized behavioral findings in Stockholm provide a compelling framework for evaluating the multi-decade property crime declines in the United States. The silent, widespread integration of environmental deterrence into our public spaces has become a primary mechanism in driving down global property crime. However, the core limitation remains. We have found ways to engineer the profit out of theft, but crimes of passion remain largely immune to these environmental tweaks. We are building a world where a massive surveillance architecture ensures that, for the rational actor, theft is now a mathematically failing business model.